The last thing I remember was the flickering glow of my monitor and the bitter taste of my fifth energy drink. My lungs suddenly felt heavy, as if I were breathing in thick, stagnant dust. I tried to move my arms, but they hit cold, hard wood only inches from my chest. A rhythmic, jolting sensation rocked my entire body, followed by the sound of horse hooves on gravel. My hands felt different, soft and fleshy, far larger than the thin fingers I was used to. I reached up to touch my face and found layers of fat where my jawline should have been. The smell of expensive perfume mixed with sweat and old wood filled my nostrils. This wasn't my room, and this certainly wasn't my body. I recalled the game I had been playing for 72 hours straight, World Forgotten by God. In that game, there was a character known as the Pig Prince, a minor villain destined to die in the prologue. Suddenly, the carriage screeched to a halt, making me roll against the wooden walls. Outside, a gruff voice shouted orders about preparing the execution site. I realized with a jolt of terror that I was inside the execution coffin described in the first chapter. If I didn't find a way out in the next few minutes, my head would be on a pike by sunrise. I forced myself to breathe slowly, tapping into the strategic mind that had conquered every difficulty level in the game. I knew the Revolutionary Army was led by a man who was deeply religious and superstitious. A small crack in the wood allowed me to see a group of soldiers gathering around a bonfire. They were laughing and drinking, celebrating the capture of the hated royal heir. I had one advantage. I knew the exact scripture they worshipped better than they did. The lid of the box creaked as someone began to unbolt the heavy iron latches. I braced myself, feeling the rush of cold night air as the lid was finally thrown open. "Get up, you fat pig," the lead soldier spat, grabbing me by the collar of my silk tunic. I stumbled onto the dirt, my knees buckling under the weight of this unfamiliar, heavy body. The soldiers roared with laughter as I struggled to stand in the mud. I looked up, and for a brief second, the laughter died down when they saw the look in my eyes. "The god of vengeance will not be pleased with this treatment of his vessel," I whispered, my voice raspy. The lead guard paused, his hand hovering over the hilt of his sword. "You dare speak of the Holy One while you rot in your own filth?" he sneered, though his voice wavered. I slowly rose to my feet, dusting off my ruined silks with a grace that the old prince never possessed. I began to recite a forgotten verse from the game's secret lore, one only known to high-level priests. A sudden, unnatural wind whipped through the clearing, extinguishing half of the torches. The soldiers gasped, stepping back as the atmosphere grew heavy and suffocating. I reached into my sleeve and crushed a small vial of phosphorus I knew the prince always kept for magic tricks. A brilliant flash of white light erupted from my palm, illuminating the terrified faces of my captors. "Kneel before the messenger of the vengeful god, or be consumed by the fire of your sins," I roared. Several younger soldiers dropped their weapons and fell to their knees, trembling. The lead guard, however, gritted his teeth and raised his spear, though his hands were shaking violently. I stepped closer to him, the phosphorus smoke curling around my head like a ghostly crown. If I could just break his will, the rest of the unit would follow his lead. But my heart was hammering against my ribs, knowing that my divine power was just a cheap parlor trick. "Kill him, he's just a lying glutton," the lead guard screamed, suddenly lunging forward with his spear. The tip of the blade stopped just an inch from my throat as I stood perfectly still, refusing to flinch. "Do it," I whispered, with a terrifying smile, "and see what remains of your soul in the void." The guard's eyes filled with pure terror as he looked past me into the darkness of the trees. Something was emerging from the woods, something that wasn't part of my plan at all. The heavy footsteps in the underbrush grew louder as the executioners surrounding my carriage drew their blades. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird inside this sweating, bloated body. I needed to think faster than the game's AI ever could if I wanted to survive the next 5 minutes. Varkas, the leader of the Ironblood rebels, kicked the carriage door open with a deafening bang. He looked at me with the disgusted expression of a man cleaning a sewer. I didn't cower or beg for mercy like the original Glowen would have done. Instead, I let out a low, guttural laugh that seemed to vibrate in the very air around us. The rebel soldiers exchanged nervous glances, confused by the sudden change in the Pig Prince. I recalled the hidden lore of the god of vengeance, a deity these rebels secretly worshipped in the game. I spoke the ancient activation phrase for the god's presence, my voice dropping an octave. "The blood of the martyrs cries out from the soil, Varkas!" Varkas froze in his tracks, his axe trembling slightly as the secret prayer reached his ears. I told him that I was no longer the prince he hated, but a vessel for the divine retribution he sought. "You think a few holy words will save your head from the block, royal scum?" I laughed again, pointing to a specific tree where I knew a hidden cache of imperial gold was buried according to the game map. "Dig beneath the roots of the twisted oak if you wish to see the first of my miracles." Varkas signaled 2 of his men to investigate, his eyes never leaving mine. Seconds felt like hours as I waited for them to find the chest I knew was there. A shout of pure astonishment echoed through the trees as the soldiers struck metal. They brought the chest back, spilling sparkling Imperial credits onto the damp moss. The god of vengeance provides for those who follow his chosen voice. Varkas lowered his axe, the weight of the gold and the prophecy beginning to crush his resolve. I then whispered a secret about Varkas's dead younger brother that only the endgame files contained. The commander's face went pale, and he fell to one knee in the mud. "Forgive us, O voice of the vengeful one, for we did not recognize your coming." Internally, I let out a massive sigh of relief. The first hurdle of this death game was cleared. "Stand up, Commander, for we have much work to do before the dawn." Varkas stood, ordering his men to burn the carriage and prepare a horse for me. I watched the flames consume my former prison, realizing there was no going back to my old life. We needed to move toward the border city of Oakhaven, the only place I could find the materials to fix this body. This body's stamina was pathetic, and I could already feel the onset of exhaustion. We must leave before the Imperial scouts find the smoke from this fire. Varkas took the lead, his skepticism replaced by a fanatical devotion that was equally dangerous. I spent the ride reviewing the stats of my new body, horrified by the Gormandizer curse affecting my health. Every hour I didn't eat something magical, my maximum HP would drop permanently. But Oakhaven had a secret black market that sold the elixir of the Slender Moon. As we approached the city gates, I realized the Revolutionary Army wasn't the only group looking for me. A group of shadows moved along the city battlements, far too coordinated to be simple guards. "Varkas, something is wrong. The gate guards are not wearing the local colors." Suddenly, a whistle pierced the air and a volley of black-feathered arrows rained down on our position. Varkas roared for the men to take cover, but I saw a figure in white standing perfectly still amidst the chaos. It was the Imperial Master Thief, a character who wasn't supposed to appear until much later in the story. She locked eyes with me, and her smile told me she knew exactly who and what I was. My knowledge of the game had just been rendered useless by this one impossible encounter. I stood at the edge of the mist-covered forest, watching the Revolutionary Army disappear into the darkness. Survival was my only priority, and the nearby neutral city of Oakhaven was the only place to find refuge. Every rustle in the bushes felt like a blade aimed at my back by an Imperial assassin. I tightened the belt of my dirt-stained royal robe and began the long trek toward the city gates. Oakhaven loomed ahead, a chaotic sprawl of stone and timber known for its lawless trade. I pulled my hood low to hide my recognizable royal features from the guards at the entrance. A figure stepped out from the shadows of a tavern, blocking my path with practiced ease. Lyra, the master thief I remembered from the game's third act, was staring right at me. She asked me why a fat noble was wandering the slums alone at midnight. I didn't flinch, knowing that showing weakness to her would mean immediate death. I told her I was looking for the Nightbloom market to sell information worth a kingdom. Her eyes sparkled with greed, exactly as the game lore described her character trait. I offered her a contract she couldn't refuse, protection in exchange for a share of my future wealth. She laughed, noting that the pig prince was supposedly executed hours ago. I whispered a secret about her past that only the game's developer would know. Her face turned pale as she realized I held power over her deepest secrets. She agreed to guide me, but only if I paid the entrance fee to the underground market. We moved through the winding sewers, the stench of decay filling my nostrils. I could hear the skittering of rats and the distant echo of footsteps following us. Lyra signaled me to be quiet as we approached a heavy iron door guarded by brutes. I stepped forward, using the last of my royal aura to intimidate the guards. The guards stepped aside, confused by the presence of a noble in such a filthy place. Inside, the black market was a riot of colors, illegal magic, and desperate people. I needed to find a specific merchant who traded in imperial secrets. A hooded man in the corner was watching me through a magical monocle. It was an imperial spy, sent to confirm the prince's death. I whispered to Lyra to create a distraction while I circled around him. She knocked over a crate of explosive fire salts, sending the crowd into a panic. I moved behind the spy, catching him off guard in the smoke and noise. I pressed a shard of glass against his throat, demanding he tell me who sent him. He stammered that the Prime Minister had ordered a cleanup of all royal bloodlines. I knocked him unconscious, knowing he would be a useful pawn later. Lyra reappeared, impressed by my hidden combat skills and cold demeanor. We finally reached the merchant I sought, a withered old gnome with piles of scrolls. He demanded a heavy price for the documents proving the Prime Minister's treason. I traded my royal signet ring, the last piece of my former life, to secure the proof. With the scrolls in hand, I finally had the leverage needed to reclaim my status. We exited the black market just as the first light of dawn touched the city walls. The pig prince was dead, and in his place, a new mastermind was rising to take the throne. My journey had only just begun, but for the first time, I was the one holding all the cards. I looked at Lyra and knew that together, we would turn this kingdom upside down. This was no longer a game for survival, it was a game for total conquest.